Welcome back to the 275th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how social media is making decision making worse, how indecisive people actually think, and how it could be shaped by social media. And then another interesting thing about social media, it's a Biden superfan and how he's trying to actually come behind President Biden in the upcoming 2024 election and give him a little bit of a boost. And of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, when you use social media a lot, do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel as though you get inundated by a lot of mixed messages? You get given very specific ads. You get targeted with very specific content, so on and so forth. You obviously feel that you have been targeted by specific content because that's how they do their job. But my point being, do you feel as though it can be a little bit overwhelming? And the reason that I think this question is important, I actually was pursuing a very specific idea when I was doing research because it was something that came up. I was having a casual conversation and I thought, oh, well, maybe social media is actually making people more indecisive. And then I found two different articles that are adjacent and they don't actually say whether or not this is 100% true. I couldn't find a specific study about it, but it still highlights how social media is affecting our decision-making processes. And I think this is something that we obviously know on some level, but I want to reveal it. I want to talk about it a little bit more because I think this is very important, especially because everybody in this generation, Gen Z, at least has, well, not everybody, I guess, that's fair. There are the exceptions, but a majority of the people have these social media apps and they are using them to some degree. And guess what? Even if it's 80%, it's not the 100% of the population. A large part of that population is going to be in places of leadership. They're going to be directing countries. They're going to be directing companies. So this is something that we obviously have to worry about and we have to spend the time thinking about. And I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive on this one today. So both of these articles come from sources that are a little bit different than I normally do. The last one, of course, is political in nature, so it comes from some of my normal sources. But this first one comes from the Association of American Universities, and the headline reads, "Excessive social media use linked to poor decision making." And this is one of those questions that we've had, all the parents have had. Is this going to make it so that our children, the future leaders, are going to have a different way of going about a process? And this is more of a generalization. Are people going to be more not as satiated with trying to look towards the long term and just continue to seek the short term enjoyment that social media brings? We've talked about this in the past. I think there is some good research to suggest that is true, but there's also a vast amount of research, or at least a changing trend now, where people within the generation are starting to realize that social media has very perverse incentives and they want to keep your attention, and that you actually, if you want to progress beyond that simple instant gratification, then you have to take some steps yourself. So, of course, there is a movement for this generation in Gen Z, and yes, I'm isolating it to Gen Z because I can speak to Gen Z a little bit more than any other generation, and also the ones that are basically the beta testers for growing up on social media. There's a growing movement within the population that says, okay, hey, I actively need to restrict how much I'm using this. I need to understand what these companies are trying to get from me, and I'm going to not resist, so to speak, but I'm going to be a prudent user. I'm going to stop going through these things and just seeking those short-term pieces of gratification. It doesn't always work. It's very hard to do on a normal basis, but at least the attempt is there. The acknowledgement that it's something that needs to happen is important. Now, there's another aspect to it, which is exactly what we're going over here. Quote, new research from Michigan State University shows a connection between social media use and impaired risky decision making, which is commonly deficient in substance addiction. So you can see how they're doing a little bit of correlation right here from the beginning. This was part of the thesis of the study that they were doing, but I'll keep on going and we'll do some quotes directly from some of the authors. Quote, around 1/3 of humans on the planet are using social media, and some of these people are displaying maladaptive, excessive use of these sites, says Dar Meshi, lead author and assistant professor at MSU. Our findings will hopefully motivate the field to take social media overuse seriously. So, we have a very specific subgroup that we're talking about here. People that overuse social media. So this is not necessarily the prudent actor, or at least the person who acknowledges that they do overuse it, they would overuse it if they were allowed, or that they don't want to overuse it. That person that I just described, we're kind of throwing them out the window right now. Let's be clear. They're not a small segment of the population, at least with the people that I interact with on a normal basis, and I'm friends with, I talk with, they all realize how it's not actually good for us. And we've gotten plenty of messages from parents, from different societies. We've had messages from people going in front of Congress. I mean, our generation has been inundated with this sort of language, so maybe that's why it resonates. But I also think that this is something that's even more peak, or at least within my periphery, because a lot of people that I myself don't use social media that much. I try not to. I don't have an Instagram except for very specific purposes, which go along with my job. I don't really use Twitter besides to post the Twitter tirade, and I'm obviously an edge study. I don't use it as much as other people in the generation, so maybe that's why I don't necessarily have this population that is overusing it around me, because I surround myself with people that don't overuse it. Or maybe it's because it's a genuine phenomenon, because I also have friends who used to overuse social media a lot and they've turned away. I mean, especially with their job, they don't even have the time. You know what they use social media for? They don't use it as a tool to just sit there and scroll forever. They use it as a tool to get resources for their classroom that they want to teach in, which that's one of the beautiful things about social media. When used right, when used prudently, when not just used as a tool to drown your sorrows or to sit there and do nothing, then it can be very, very productive. And that would definitely not be the group that is in this overusing category. But we do need to examine the overusing category, because not everybody is like my friend. Not everybody is using it prudently. And let's be clear, when I do use social media like YouTube, am I using it prudently? I'll watch educational videos every once in a while, but not always. So there are definitely times where I could probably fall into that category that would be saying, hey, excessive use, not using it for something that's actually aiding you, but simply taking away your time and farming out your attention as a way to make money. But that's another commentary about Google, social media, all of them. Let's get back to the main point here, which is how it actually affects decision making. Quote, decision making is oftentimes compromised in individuals with substance use disorders. They sometimes fail to learn from their mistakes and continue down the path of negative outcomes, Meshi said. Quote, but no one previously looked at the behaviors as it relates to excessive social media users, so we have investigated this possible parallel between excessive social media users and substance abusers. While we didn't test for the cause of poor decision making, we tested for its correlation with problematic social media use. So what they're saying here is they're not doing brain scans and saying, oh, this is the thing that is directly causing the bad decision making, and we know that this is stimulated by XYZ social media use, so on and so forth. They're not doing the direct effect, but they are looking at the correlation between people who are on social media a lot and also display bad decision making. Or maybe it's possible they don't display bad decision making. Otherwise, if they only looked at the people that are on social media and doing making bad decisions, then of course they're going to have a very slanted group, and they'd probably be testing for something else. So what are some of the parameters for this? And it is a smaller study. Quote, Meshi and the co-authors had 71 participants take a survey that measured their psychological dependence on Facebook, similar to addiction. Questions on the survey asked about the user's preoccupation with the platform, their feeling when unable to use it, attempts to quit, and the impact that Facebook has had on their job or studies. The researchers then had the participants do the Iowa gambling task, a common exercise used by psychologists to measure decision making. To successfully complete the task, users identify outcome patterns in decks of cards to choose a possible deck. I'll be honest, this part of the methodology, if you don't care or you don't know what the Iowa gambling task is, I am raising my hand because I may fall into that group. That may not interest you as much, but the point here is that they are using tried and true tools for decision making that have been established within the psychological world, which is the Iowa gambling task. And then they are also going to match those results with the people who have a more, I don't want to say toxic, but a worse relationship with Facebook. So people that would probably answer on the questionnaire, do you feel anxious when you don't have the ability to access Facebook? They would probably be in the higher end of the people who have a dependence or excessively use social media. And therefore, they would look at their results and say, okay, hey, well, Tammy, she uses Facebook all the time. She really loves it. She feels bad when she doesn't have it around her, and she uses it to go through and look through dog photos and family photos. They may even value that differently than the person who uses it just to randomly scroll through content. But the point would be that in both of those cases, they are excessive users, and you could weight them differently if you so chose, but you don't have to. You can just say, okay, this is an excessive user category. They use it for over 6 hours a day. Now let's look at their critical decision-making processes. Are they better or worse at it? And let's be clear, we would have to replicate this on an even larger scale. We would have to probably do a group of 1,000. We want to make sure we get people from all different age groups, because there could be other factors that have actually changed the way that people make decisions between generations. Maybe, people who didn't have TV as much also have a large change, and it might not just be social media. So to make this truly comprehensive, we would have to expand it out. But right now, what we're seeing is, I don't want to say conclusive, but it definitely alludes to the fact that there is a social media and decision-making problem issue. Quote, with so many people around the world using social media, it's critical for us to understand its use, Meshi said. I believe that social media has tremendous benefits for individuals, but there's a dark side when people can't pull themselves away. We need to better understand this drive so we can determine if this excessive social media use should be considered an addiction. And I'm going to be honest, I am not a doctor, but I have talked about this before. It is an addiction because, remember what I mentioned at the very beginning, that seeking of short-term satisfaction, that is a release of dopamine, serotonin, and just like if you're hitting any type of substance that releases the same thing, even if it's not on the same scale, it's repeated and it just keeps coming. And it even has the effect of, for somebody who is truly engulfed in social media, they seek things that bring out more dopamine and serotonin in the videos that they're watching or the clips that they're watching, and you can see escalatory behavior. There have been studies about this, the rabbit hole of social media, so to speak. You seek more salacious content that evokes stronger emotions from you. So we know that this at least has been established or talked about before, and this definitely feels like seeking behavior. If you're not just content with what it is, and even if that contention, being okay with spending 6 hours brings you enough joy, and that's fine, but the escalation is also a addiction seeking behavior. The last one wasn't, and I'm not going to say the word specifically because I don't like when YouTube does its dumb algorithm thing, but the last experience does not quite measure up to the current one. So in order to feel better or feel the same, you kind of have to escalate and go to the next thing. And guess what that does for people who are on social media a lot? Like I said, it either takes them to more extreme content, or they just try to fit in more content to get more small dopamine hits. There have been plenty of studies about this before. Height's book that just came out also goes into this, at least this part of it, where he's talking about the effects of social media on our kids and our future society. And I just thought this was another great article that breaks down it's not just affecting their social standing or whether they're sad, but it is also changing whether or not they are making prudent decisions. Are they able to actually look forward beyond immediate consequences? Are they able to actually not make risky decisions in certain situations. This is all important stuff that we need to take into account here. And I thought it was interesting when the next article that popped up pulled me this way, which is what makes people indecisive. So this one, like I said, not my normal sources. It's coming from Psychology Today. And like I just read, the headline is what makes people indecisive. So it's a little bit of an excerpt from a education professor, and he's doing a bit of a blog here. And I just want to read you the first two paragraphs. Quote, "Do you ever find yourself needlessly obsessing over an important decision or avoiding making that decision altogether by any means? You have a few, often equally attractive, options to choose from, but you obsessed over only a handful, exhaustively searching for information about them, though every detail and all of its minutia. But do you get easily distracted by other things, lose concentration, but ultimately do you end up feeling overwhelmed and avoid making the final decision? The thought of making the final pick among the alternatives daunts us all, filling us with a multitude of what ifs in life. For example, what if I moved to London instead of New York or Chicago and missed out on the cool work opportunities in NYC? So, this is a great breakdown of how, at least, hey, I'll be honest, when I read it, I was like, yeah, no, I have definitely sat and ruminated about decisions for too long. And let's be clear, he's talking about very big decisions here. So he's making a distinction between indecisiveness on a large scale versus a small scale. And I would even argue on a larger scale, it makes a lot more sense because the weight of the decision, as he's mentioning here, is a lot larger. That makes sense to me. To some degree, I understand. Okay, if you're making a decision that's going to affect the rest of your life, aka this decision here, am I going to move to X city or Y city? Am I going to move back to the office? Am I going to stay in the field? Am I going to take this new position? All of these things should be weighed very, very carefully. And the process of making the decision is weighing all of it, getting as much information as possible. But when people are indecisive, they push back, okay? They look for all the information they can. They create a false narrative that more, at one point, once they've reached, let's say it's a bell curve, so to speak. They're thinking, okay, once we reach the pinnacle of knowledge, or let's say it this way, the bell curve would represent useful knowledge. Okay, so you start with the low end. As you keep reading, you're getting lots of useful knowledge, and then you used to hit somewhere around the 50% mark. You've gotten a lot of useful knowledge, and now from that point on the bell curve, anything you read, it is useful, but it's diminishing returns. And the whole thing about indecision is believing that you can actually get all the information to make a perfect decision, and you delay. Or you're just a procrastinator and you use it as an excuse. He goes on to actually detail this a little bit longer and kind of plays off the fact that the procrastination could be a symptom of indecision versus maybe indecision is actually stirred on by the pushing off the decision, by the procrastinating, and at that point you don't want to deal with it anymore. It's an interesting mix that he's going through. But why does this relate to social media? How does this tie back in? My first thing that I thought of when reading this is, okay, so people are constantly looking for distractions. So guess what? Social media, we just talked about how it's a great distraction, how it's able to pull you in, how it's able to get your mind off of the current decisions that you may have to be making. You can go and chase those dopamine hits, those serotonin hits, and not have to worry about the anxiety of actually thinking about the consequences of your actions, what would be best for you, what your future looks like, what X, Y, and Z is going to end up doing for you. And this is all great. And also then there's the other aspect to it, which is it's also completely justifiable to say, okay, I'm making a hard decision. Let me go on social media and see what other people's experiences are. Let me see what the current topics are talking about in the city. You can go to Instagram and you can pull up the location tag and see, NYC, look at that, NYC, this is happening there. You can go to YouTube. What is housing cost in NYC? Like, you can get so absorbed into the information seeking process. And maybe you do start well-intentioned, but then eventually it turns into information overload because you want to, once again, make that perfect decision. So while social media may not be the actual cause of indecisiveness, even though I think there could be something there because it short circuits some of the firing mechanisms of dopamine releases and actually changes the way that your mind views incentives, which is, I think, when I make a decision, I feel better normally, or at least when I'm stuck in between two things and I make a decision, I feel a certain sense of relief. And if that's associated with dopamine and serotonin, this is just a random theory. I'm not saying it's backed up by anything, but if those were associated with serotonin and dopamine, it would make sense that if you have another mechanism that can hijack that and make the process of getting dopamine and serotonin naturally feel less rewarding than something else, then maybe you wouldn't be as incentivized to actually seek out or engage in any of that behavior, which is actually making decisions. But that's where I initially started for today, and that's where I wanted to go with it, because I have a lot of people in my life who are very indecisive. Not all of them use a lot of social media. Some of them do use a lot of social media, and as I've established, I can be sort of indecisive sometimes. And I used to use social media a lot. That's when I was really indecisive. Now I just kind of go, which is it could actually be the inverse. It could be that I use social media in such a way that I'm being a more risky decision maker. I'm not actually thinking it through. That could be an interesting one. Maybe I have this whole thing on its head. But the point that I was getting at here with social media, it is a enabler. It is a tool that enables indecision because you can get information overload, because you can get short-term satisfaction and relief from that anxiety that you face when having to make decisions. And the other reason I think that it applies on not just the larger scale, because remember, this author's talking about large-scale decisions. On small-scale decisions, where do we want to go for dinner? Where do we want to do this? Because of the internet, because of social media. One, because of social media, you have a whole bunch of standards. You see what everybody else is eating. You see what all the possibilities are. You are overwhelmed with a whole bunch of choices. And as many people have been talking about recently, that is one of the interesting things about our economy, which is you have so many choices, and very often people they go to defaults because it's easier, because they don't have to put so much effort into it, and they don't have to be overwhelmed by the choices. That's why candy bars that are on the middle shelf or top shelf or right at eye level basically get picked more often than ones that are at the bottom, because you don't have to do any extra effort to explore. You don't even have to look into the can of worms to be overwhelmed by it. You can just pick whatever is right there on the top of the can. Analogy kind of makes sense, but you get the point I'm getting at here. So on the smaller scale, when these sort of indecisive moments come up, maybe you're overwhelmed by choices, maybe you just don't want to actually make it, or you can be easily distracted. And social media doesn't help with that. I think that could be a contributing factor. Now, does it mean there's an underlying rewiring of the brain that makes decision-making harder and making people more indecisive? The first article suggests decision-making, but not necessarily indecisive. And when it comes to decision-making, they're not talking about whether or not you actually make the decision, but whether or not you make good decisions. So it's still out. But I think this is something that we really need to examine going forward. As I mentioned, our future leaders are on these devices right now. They are watching social media, and they are being influenced by them. So we have to take a critical look at this, and especially our generation who grew up with it, because we have the best ability to at least subjectively provide evidence to what we felt like was going on. And you can also have the most compelling story when talking to somebody else about it. If you were a person who's previously addicted to social media, your story is going to come across better than the mom who relays the story to somebody else, because you can talk about what you were feeling and maybe somebody else can relate to that. And though we don't always love the subjective appeals, we want some objective facts. I think that personal stories always, anecdotes are always going to resonate to some degree. So, with that said, we want to talk about one of the big influencers now on social media and his backing of President Biden. This is how we started it. This article comes from Semaphore, and the headline reads, "Biden has a TikTok problem. Superfan Henry Sisson wants to help." And when let's be clear, I have read previously some of the articles talking about Sisson. I have seen some of his videos, and I find the guy honestly kind of hilarious. I'll be honest. And when I say that, I don't mean that I necessarily agree with all of his content, but just this line from him at the end, quote, "It doesn't bother me anymore." He said, "If you're taking time out of your day as a 40-year-old white guy to come comment on my page, then then I suppose I'm doing something right. Or maybe you just don't have that much going on. Whether or not I don't like that he's just trying to call out some random person, but I think he's right. If you're just coming to the page and you have enough time to comment on everything and go through all the videos and do a response, and good for you. I'm happy you're voicing your opinion, but maybe something else needs to be going on. Maybe it's your day off. Maybe you're an aspiring TikTok creator too, and you're carving out time. Maybe you're like me and you carve out an hour and a half, roughly each day. Well, maybe sometimes it's 2 hours for content related stuff, and you're trying to build your presence. Fair enough, but just that comment, it's like, yeah, okay. I totally get where he's coming from. It's kind of funny. Now, like I said, do I agree with everything? No, but he is making a concerted effort, and he's doing what he believes is his job. He's doing something that is akin to advocacy, which is actually one of the things that Semaphore mentions in the article. They say, and it's going to also include a quote from him, quote, "When that video took off, Citizen started taking the power of the platform more seriously. Quote, I was thinking, wow, this could have a real impact on politics. Maybe this is where the future of advocacy lies," he said. Now, let's be clear. Maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's just a little bit arrogant to say, oh, this could have a real impact on politics. If he's talking about himself, if he's talking about the broader implications of social media use and social media advocacy, yes, okay, I totally don't disagree with him. And I find it amazing that people are engaging on this level, whether or not I agree with this young gentleman. He is 21 years old. He's going through college. He obviously has something going for him. He's savvy, smart, talking fast. He's got some sort of skill set, obviously, and he can go viral on TikTok, and he is pushing a very specific message. He has a belief system, and he is advocating. So I think that he is doing what he believes is right to affect political change. And this is something that we do love about America. And the funny thing is that TikTok, and this is, I wanted to tie it back in here because TikTok is one of those apps that has been ridiculed for all those things that I talked about previously, of pulling in kids for too long, hurting their decision-making process, possibly causing them to be addicted to social media, so on and so forth. And I don't think that they're wrong. I don't think that out of all the apps that I have seen my friends and family members use, TikTok and now even Instagram Reels, these are some, and YouTube Shorts get me every once in a while. That's why I don't have any of the other ones, because I'm afraid it's not like, oh, I'm high and mighty. I've said it throughout this thing, like, oh, I don't have it. I'm not high and mighty. I promise you. It is because I am base. It is because I am afraid to just sit there and go through Reels, go through TikTok. Also, I don't want to give my information to Instagram or TikTok because they can use your microphone when you're outside your app. So maybe I'm a little high and mighty on that one. But I'm also genuinely afraid of wasting too much time on these. And that's why I try not to click on YouTube Shorts, because they are also very effective at getting you drawn in. So we can see that there's an overall connector here, and maybe that's why it is an effective advocacy kind of tool, and that's what Simpson's talking about here, because after his video, it's somebody else advocating for Biden, or there's somebody else from that side of the aisle advocating for a specific issue. It channels and funnels everybody down into an algorithmic hole that is a little bit more customized for them. So, hey, at least, you're stuck in a hole, but it's your own hole. It's your own personal hole. And if you want to go through it for hours upon hours and just keep digging and digging, go right ahead. Nobody else is going to get in your way. It is just you, honey bun. So I think this is a interesting point of view. I think that Sisson is speaking about something here. I think he's right about the advocacy. And I think that these tools, because of the nature of keeping people attached to them and bringing them back to the same creators, can have a very good effect. Just like how my podcast feed shows the same probably 6 podcasts from all across the political aisle, and that limits some of the information I'm getting. Even if they have different perspectives, it still limits the information I'm getting. Every once in a while, I'll listen to another podcast that has a different point of view from almost everybody. I was like, wow, why didn't I think about that? So even someone who doesn't use social media rapidly, Spotify still does this. Everything still does this. It still sends us into our silos, and it makes it so that even making a decision outside of that silo or having a thought process outside of that silo is harder, unless you're a critical thinker and you're not just listening casually and agreeing or disagreeing. So I think that this is a serious discussion that we are already having. Like I said, Height's book goes into this. It delves into this. We're not ignoring it. But I always want to bring it back to the forefront, and I always want to talk about, or at least bring forward, some of the parts that aren't being talked about. Because right now in the mainstream is to talk about how it's affecting kids, the social interaction, the sadness, depression. But I think the decision-making process and how that's tied with the addiction aspect has been talked about before, but they're not making that correlation to the decision-making side. And I think this is a worthwhile hole that I've been digging through, but I've been creating my own funnel. I created my own algorithm for myself to just keep digging down this one, and I think it is worthwhile to discuss, and I'm happy that you joined me for this one, and maybe you can tell somebody else about it. All the links to the articles will be in the description, so you can share them with your friends. You can also share the video or the podcast on Spotify and all that, but normally I do my promotion. Sorry, that's a helpless plug. I need to stop that. My promotions come at the end because we still got one more thing, which is the Daily Delight. And this one comes from Discovery Wildlife. The headline reads, 3 adorable baby beavers filmed splashing around in the water at a nature reserve in England. So that is the headline that comes through, but I'll be honest, it does not do a service to these guys. You can see the photos. They have their little sticks in the mouths, and they're obviously learning from Pops how to build the dam. And there's also a video associated with this. So if you want to see any of the photos or the video from this article, or like I mentioned, you want to read any of today's articles, there'll be a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the link to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday, short form, a little bit more ranty, less structured, and also probably a little bit more stupid because I don't have something to confine my dumb thoughts sometimes. But it's always enjoyable in my mind, and I think we've actually had I've had some pretty good discussions over there for sure. And if anything, it just gives you an extra place to hear about what a person from Gen Z thinks about. And if you don't like it, you can go criticize it, retweet it, repost it, and start, getting me on the Twitter hole. Maybe you could be the person that yanks me into Twitter because I feel like I have to respond to your criticism of one of my Twitter tirades, or some of the love for one of my Twitter tirades. I don't know. But that really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I'm just more grateful that you're here, that you listened, that you made it to this point in the podcast. So with all that other stuff said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.